I want to do a couple of update things at the start of this. First off, there is a poll on the channel, on the community page, on who's going to win Game 7, be it Boston or St. Louis. St. Louis is leading, which confirms what I kind of suspected was going on with the channel over the last few weeks. I suspect that there's a lot of new subscribers who are Blues fans. Welcome to the channel. And I say that because Bob McKenzie had a vote that had 23,000 or 13,000 responses, and it was 50-50, Boston, St. Louis. This is one heck of a close series, and it is very, very, very unpredictable. And I know there's a lot of people predicting, well, Boston's not going to lose at home. Okay. I've talked about their Stanley Cup Finals experience and their Stanley Cup Finals failures in the past. I'm just going to leave it there. There's some other fun video stuff where I can look at historical situations that Boston and St. Louis are both facing going into Game 7. And I also wanted to throw out there as well, I've mentioned this a couple times already, but the next meetup we're going to have will be on the 29th in Chilliwack. So for people who are in that area are able to go. Again, this is just a test to see whether or not I can have one in the Eastern Fraser Valley and have a good turnout. Now, those things said, I wanted to discuss a little bit of impartiality versus bias. When I write up the notes on the board there, which is what I was doing during the live stream yesterday, and one of the reasons why I tend to start the live stream at 6 o'clock my time, which is usually towards the end of or after the first period, is so that I can get a lot of notes up there. I can get a good feel for how the game's going before the live stream has started, so that I can give it 100% of my attention. And then from there, I have the chat going and everything, and the game doesn't get as much of my attention as it otherwise would, which is kind of the trade-off. So, impartiality means this, to me anyways, that while I'm watching the game, I'm just watching it as a fan. I don't care what jersey they're wearing, I'm just watching it as a fan. And I understand that there's been a lot of new subscribers picked up over the last couple of months who maybe didn't watch my stuff during the regular season, but I tend to be very, very hard on teams I cheer for. That is Vancouver, that is Boston, that is Dallas. I predicted Dallas would miss the playoffs. There were points this year where it looked like to me Boston could slip out of the playoffs. And Vancouver, even when they were in, I said they're not going to make the playoffs. I'm glad that they're number 2 wild card tonight, but they won't be the number 2 wild card at this time next week. And I was fine with that. And I had people saying, you're not really a fan of these teams. You just, you're trash talking them. And the reality was I saw issues with teams I cheered for a lot more readily than I necessarily saw them with others. And it's sort of like parents who are harder on their own kids than on other people's kids. It's just sort of, that's always been the analogy that I've used. And in watching even up until the Stanley Cup final, I've seen Boston doing things. People always say, you're not talking about this dirty hit and that dirty hit. Because it's both. I've watched St. Louis and Boston fans going back and forth at each other in this finals, and it's just, all I can think is it's 2011 all over again, where there were Vancouver and Boston fans going back and forth at each other, and all I could think was, okay, just stop. Just stop it. Vancouver had Kessler and Burroughs and Bieksa, and then there was the Rome hit, and there were a lot of things Vancouver was doing that I was like, oh, stop it. And then with Boston, you have Thornton, when Thornton goes into the lineup after Horton gets hurt, the Thornton's like challenging the whole Canucks bench to a fight. And Marchand was doing his thing, and there was a lot of, both teams were doing things in that finals that had me cringing and just saying this is dumb. And keep in mind, those are my two favorite teams going up against each other. Now, in this finals, I have seen instances where I think David Perron's lost his cool and cost his team goals. I'm not going to say games because I'm not going to say it. There have been moments where I've thought Boston's lost its cool as well. Marchand seems to be riding that line and know that line. He has been suspended a lot of times. He has. He has been suspended, I believe it's 6 times and fined 5 times. That is 11 times that player safeties called him and said, hey, so Brad, we got you on speed dial for a reason and we need to talk. But it's knowing that line, and I think where sometimes we get caught up, because last night there were a number of times where And I didn't do this during the live stream, but I do this when I'm watching hockey and there's no camera on me, where I will see something that probably would have been a call during the regular season, and I will hear fans in the crowd react when the referee's hand doesn't go up, and I say out loud, "Yeah, you're not getting that call." And it doesn't matter whether it's a Bruins player doing it or it's a Blues player doing it. It's just we're now in the Stanley Cup Finals. A lot of what gets called as penalties during the regular season, they're no longer penalties. And I don't understand it any more than anybody else does. I have railed against it for years. You can look back through old videos of mine. Even look through, I've got a Brad Marchand playlist. So anybody who thinks I'm all pro Marchand and I love the guy, just go check out that playlist. I'm not a big fan of some of the crap he's pulled. But the the real deal with this is that at the end of a game, when all the notes are up on the board, there's no emotion in the notes. And I mean, yesterday was the first time I've actually, in my recollection anyways, watched a Bruins game with a Bruins fan. That was strange. I there's no other Bruins fans in my house. The kids all picked their own teams to cheer for, and they picked Carolina or Edmonton or Vegas or Toronto or like Minnesota, Winnipeg. There's been no choice of Boston. My wife's picked Winnipeg, Minnesota, Vancouver. Boston's not on anybody's list. So the last night was something different. And if you watch that, yeah, I did the shipping up to Boston at the end. I've done that in a live stream earlier in the playoffs as well. Now, when the camera's not on me, I'm far more animated. There was a game, I'm trying to think, I think it was the last game in the series against Carolina where I was celebrating quite a bit. And then I went, all right, I've got to do the review. And I got all of it out before I did the review. When I say impartiality, when I talk about being impartial, it means that what you guys get on the board isn't a bunch of, yay, this team won, or boo, that team won. And, no bitterness. And I still stand by the fact that, St. Louis is an excellent road team. St. Louis, they have 9 wins in the playoffs on the road. 10 would tie the record, and I'm not counting them out. Boston's lost 2 out of 3 at home, and when I see people saying, well, they can't lose 3 out of 4, yeah, they can, because it's a different game. It doesn't work that way. And again, there were certainly plays last night that could have been called as penalties on both teams. Both sides did it. And there was that one interference call on Chara, and it's like, I said to Clayton while we're watching it, he said, well, that was a weak call. And I said, the referee watching probably saw those other 3 or 4 plays he could have called and said, all right, that's it. I have to call that. So, they're trying to let them play, and then it's like, okay, done. That's it. I have to call that. And so they call it. And that's usually how it works in the Stanley Cup Finals. So people will get caught up in all those plays that didn't get called penalties prior to that one that finally did. And they may look at that one that finally did and say, well, that wasn't as bad as that other one before. And they're probably right. But the referee really didn't want to have to call anything there because they really don't want to decide the game. And again, this isn't something new. This isn't something the NHL just started doing. This goes back to as long as I've watched hockey, where once you reach the Stanley Cup Finals, they're just not calling anything anymore. And there are a lot of plays you watch. Like I've got right there on the board, the McAvoy clothesline Steen, and there was no call. Now, if there was something coloring the way that I wrote my notes and having me say, oh, I'm going to lean towards anything that makes Boston look good, I wouldn't have that up there. But I thought, wow, that really should have been a penalty. But then it's not long after that, like I said, that they call the Chara interference penalty. So, and Chara's going off the ice shaking his head, and likely because he's thinking, there was a lot of other stuff they could have called. They called that on me? Seriously? And also because that's kind of hockey player 101. That anytime you get called for a penalty, you just shake your head and you sigh and you look up and you point at the screen. Just this. And I stated this going back to the regular season, that if something happens in a game and you cheer the referee and you go like this, the referee's arm immediately should go up. And it should be, what did I get a penalty for? You did this, you did something. Something happened, and you're responsible. And just don't do this because that means you did something and you know you're getting a penalty or you should get a penalty. But again, that's more of a joking thing I would do during the regular season. I understand everything's like more important and everybody sees it as being a lot bigger, and it is. Game 7 on Wednesday is huge. That is the biggest game in hockey, is Game 7 in a Stanley Cup final. And we haven't seen that since it was 2011 was the last one, right? So Boston Game 7s, right? People are going to point to that too. They're going to say, well, they beat Vancouver. I don't think St. Louis is like Vancouver at all. Vancouver was run out of the rink and they were the team that got physically wore down. It feels like St. Louis is more capable of physically wearing down the Boston Bruins, and maybe that Game 7 turns out to be more in favor of St. Louis as a result. But again, it's what I've seen in these playoffs, that it's just been wildly unpredictable. And am I a fan of the Bruins? Absolutely, 100%. Yep. There are people who won't subscribe to me because I cheer for Boston, and that's weird. Because 90% of the guys you see on TV, they have teams they cheer for. They just don't say it on TV. I will admit it to you guys because I think that that's okay. And I find it weird that, the sportscasters can't come out and say, well, I'm a fan of, because then everybody will go, he's not impartial. Well, of course they're not. Of course they're not. Because especially when it's former hockey players, they have to be cheering for these teams they played for, or cheering against them if they had a bad exit. So I find it really weird that people are like, I think he's cheering for this guy, I think he's cheering for that guy. About people on ESPN, TSN, Sportsnet, of course they're cheering for certain teams. And it's a shame they can't just come out and admit it. So I do that up front. Up front, I say, here's who I am and here's why. And there's videos on this channel explaining why I cheer for the teams that I do. I've got videos where I've talked about my favorite teams from 1 through 31. And I'm due to do another one of those videos this summer. It's going to be trickier than it's ever been, though, because I watch so much hockey and I take in so much from everybody. On this rack here at this end, this is all Toronto. This is Toronto Maple Leafs. So this is my Rob Ramage. I've got 15 Toronto Maple Leaf jerseys. 15. And there's still a couple of others that I could add to the collection. And I don't cheer for Toronto. So when people bring up the jerseys that are being worn and everything, I understand they're probably newer to the channel. And this rack, there's another one that matches it back there, and there's a smaller one in the corner. And then there's the fashion jerseys, the Cancer, the St. Patrick's Day jersey, all of these jerseys are all hung up in my closet in the bedroom. So, and then there's other leagues, like a couple of European jerseys. There's a lot. And again, I understand for newer people to the channel, because I used to get that a lot, especially when the channel started, which was, well, why are you wearing that? And the worst thing was, when the channel started, I'd wear a different hat than jersey. So when people say, well, maybe for the preview for Game 7, you could wear a hat for one team and a jersey for the other, I can't. My wife's kind of looked over her glasses at me with it. You can't do that. And she's right. So we'll see what I do for that preview. But again, I will celebrate or not celebrate based on what happens in Game 7. Because as a fan of the team, basically Game 7, if it were a Boston win, would likely be the happiest I've ever been as a hockey fan. Because 2011, I was cheering for Vancouver. 1999, when Dallas won, I was happy, but the skate in the crease definitely put a damper on it. Absolutely, because that's all I've heard for 20 years now is about Brett Hull's skate being in the crease. And Wednesday, I was going to say tomorrow, but they're not playing tomorrow. They're playing Wednesday. Wednesday has the potential to be the happiest that I've ever been as a hockey fan. Period. That there will never have been a moment like that in my entire life. So, and acknowledging that this could very likely be the last chance they ever have to win a Stanley Cup. I absolutely would enjoy that moment a lot. And hopefully, for Blues fans that are out there, they can understand that, This guy will give me coverage of my team, and he'll be as impartial in how he presents it as possible, while we are on the understanding that he does cheer for the Boston Bruins. So there you go. If you watched the live stream last night, you'll notice that Clayton was just cheering and celebrating. I mean, the first goal, he scared the heck out of Yvonne when that first goal went in with his cheer and his scream. I normally wouldn't cheer and scream until it's the last minute of the game. You might hear a scream out of me. But outside of that, I don't. I keep it very, 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 very close to the vest, and I don't like to cheer out loud, because if the hockey gods hear me and they go, wait, that was a little too loud, then the karma thing hits, and then there's some superstition, especially as the playoffs go along. All right, thank you guys so much for all your support. Thank you guys so much for helping this channel with this explosive growth. So I just wanted to discuss this morning before we move along into other hockey-related topics for today. I know a vast majority of people who support this channel absolutely 100% get it. The fact that I'm a fan of certain teams, while I still do everything I can to provide an emotionless response to the situations that come up and to game results. I've done it all regular season. I'll do it again next regular season, and during the off season, I try to promote every team equally that seems to help the channel with its growth as well. I do talk about all 31 teams, soon to be 32. So we'll see when Team 32 comes in how they fit in, because they're going to be a natural rival to Vancouver. So it may be hard for me to cheer for them at all, because if they're better than Vancouver right out of the gate, which could happen, we know that. And if they're a team that I feel like takes liberties when they're against Vancouver, yeah, that may not be fun. But I'll be one of the first people to get one of their jerseys if possible. It wasn't really possible with Vegas. It was tough to get Vegas, but once I had a chance to get Vegas, I did it. But yeah, there you go. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. And again, thank you guys so much for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.